stared at the two glowing blind boxes resting on the velvet pedestal. In our last life, my best friend chose the path of the ruthless tech billionaire, leaving me to perish as a discarded trophy wife. Today, we're back. I watched her greedily snatch the female lead box, completely unaware that I remember everything, too. The deafening crunch of metal and the suffocating scent of burning rubber faded into a sharp, startling gasp. My eyes flew open. I wasn't trapped upside down in the mangled wreckage of a luxury sedan on a rainy highway. I was sitting upright on a lumpy, familiar twin mattress. The faint, unmistakable smell of cheap instant coffee and vanilla body mist filled the air. Room 304, St. Jude's University dorms. I dragged a trembling hand down my face, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My phone screen lit up on the nightstand. The 14th of April, 2018. I had come back. In my previous life, this was the exact day my destiny split from that of my best friend, Daphne Sinclair. It was the day of the campus spring carnival, the day we wandered into an unmarked, dimly lit tent tucked between the cotton candy stand and the Ferris wheel. Inside that tent, an eccentric vendor had offered us two ornate blind boxes. One promised the life of a female lead, a path of effortless glamour, high society romance, and infinite luxury. The other promised the male lead a grueling journey of starting from the bottom, building a ruthless empire, and wielding absolute power. Back then, Daphne had shoved me aside to grab the male lead box. She was fiercely ambitious, tired of her middle-class upbringing, and wanted the world in the palm of her hand. I, naive and passive, happily took the remaining female lead box. What a catastrophic mistake. My so-called fairy tale life became a gilded cage. I married Tristan Hastings, the heir to the Hastings real estate dynasty. From the outside, I was the envy of every magazine cover lounging on yachts in Saint-Tine, Tropez, dripping in Cartier, attending exclusive galas. But behind closed doors, Tristan was a monster. He was controlling, manipulative, and deeply unfaithful. Worse, the Hastings family was secretly drowning in generational debt. When the creditors finally cornered them, they took out a massive life insurance policy on me. My fatal car crash wasn't an accident, it was a liquidation strategy. And Daphne? Daphne became a ruthless tech titan. She built an empire, but it turned her into a cold, isolated shell. When I begged her for help, terrified of Tristan, she looked at me from across her massive mahogany desk and sneered. "You chose the easy road, Emma. You're just a trophy. I built a legacy. I don't waste capital bailing out bad investments." "Emma, are you deaf? Get up!" The sharp voice shattered my memories. I looked up to see Daphne standing in the doorway of our dorm, holding 2 tickets to the spring carnival. Her eyes were bright, almost feverish, and there was a frantic, desperate energy radiating from her that I had never seen before. Wait. I studied the slight tremor in her hands and the dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. She looked at me not with the casual affection of a college roommate, but with a complex mix of resentment, exhaustion, and raw greed. She remembers. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Daphne had also been reborn. In her past life, despite her billions, she died alone, miserable, and utterly consumed by the stress of her empire. She must have spent her final moments envying my flawless Instagram feed, completely oblivious to the fact that my designer dresses were covering bruises and that my luxurious life was a death sentence. "Hurry up," Daphne snapped, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to go to the carnival, right now. There's a specific tent I want to check out." I kept my face perfectly blank. "All right, Daph, let me just grab my coat." When we arrived at the carnival, Daphne practically sprinted past the screaming students and flashing neon lights. She made a beeline for the edge of the fairgrounds, where the mysterious purple-draped tent stood silently, seemingly unnoticed by everyone else. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of sandalwood and ozone. The ancient vendor sat behind a table, smiling cryptically as he presented the 2 boxes. "2 destinies," the vendor croaked. "The female lead, wrapped in silk, courted by kings, a life of romance and rescue. The male lead, forged in fire, standing alone at the summit, a life of conquest and control, Choose wisely." Before the vendor could even finish his sentence, Daphne lunged. She slammed her hands onto the table, her manicured fingers wrapping fiercely around the delicate, rose gold box marked female lead. She clutched it to her chest, her breathing heavy, and shot me a triumphant, almost manic glare. "I'm taking this one," she declared, her voice dripping with a bizarre mixture of relief and venom. "I deserve to be spoiled. I deserve the yachts, the clothes, the romance. I am done working myself to the bone while you just bat your eyelashes and get handed the world." She slapped a hand over her mouth, realizing she had said too much, but I just tilted my head, feigning innocent confusion. "Okay," I said, keeping my tone light and breezy. "You can have it, Daph. I don't mind." I reached out and calmly picked up the heavy obsidian box marked male lead. It was cold to the touch, and a faint hum vibrated against my palms. Daphne let out a breath she had been holding, a smug smile spreading across her lips. "You're going to hate it, Emma. The sleepless nights, the backstabbing, the ulcer-inducing stress. But don't worry, when I'm Mrs. Hastings, I'll be sure to invite you to my charity galas." I smiled back, a genuine, terrifying smile that she completely misread. "Thanks, Bestie," I whispered. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The moment we returned to the dorms, Daphne tore into her box like a starving animal. Inside rested a delicate, glowing diamond pendant, the Aura Charm. According to the ornate card tucked beneath it, wearing it would grant the user an irresistible, magnetic appeal to the most powerful air in their vicinity. She fastened it around her neck immediately. "Tristan is going to be at the Alpha Sigma mixer tonight," she murmured to herself, already tossing her casual clothes onto the floor and digging for her tightest dress. "I'm going to bump into him. I'm going to drop my drink. He's going to offer his jacket. It's going to be perfect." I sat quietly on my bed, turning the heavy obsidian box in my lap. When I popped the latch, there was no glittering jewelry. Instead, resting on a bed of black velvet was a sleek, matte black USB drive. The card beside it read, "The Genesis algorithm." In her past life, Daphne used this exact algorithm to launch her data compression startup, which eventually became a global tech monopoly. But Daphne was naturally a tech head. I was a literature major. She assumed that by leaving me the male lead box, she was handing a loaded gun to someone who didn't even know how to find the safety. What she didn't know was that during my years as a captive trophy wife, I had spent thousands of hours in Tristan's private library, secretly educating myself on finance, venture capital, and tech acquisitions just to maintain my sanity. I knew Daphne's entire business model. I knew who she hired, who she fired, and exactly when she pitched to her first angel investor. I plugged the USB into my laptop. The code was complex, beautiful, and completely foreign to me. But I didn't need to understand the syntax. I just needed to understand its value. While Daphne spent her weeks skipping classes, lingering outside the business building, and successfully seducing Tristan Hastings, I was haunting the computer science labs. I needed a partner. I needed Arthur Pendleton. Arthur was a brilliant but socially awkward senior who, in the previous timeline, Daphne had hired for pennies, exploited for his genius, and eventually fired right before the company went public. I found him slumped over a keyboard at 2 a.m., surrounded by empty energy drink cans. "I have a proprietary algorithm that reduces cloud storage costs by 40% without latency drops," I told him, dropping a coffee cup onto his desk. "I need a CTO to help me build the interface. 50-50 equity split." Arthur blinked at me through smudged glasses. "Who are you?" "I'm Emma, and I'm going to make us billionaires." Within 2 months, the contrast in my and Daphne's lives was staggering. Daphne was living her female lead dream. She was officially dating Tristan, and her Instagram feed was a curated masterpiece of enormous bouquets of roses, steering wheels of luxury cars, and kissing selfies at exclusive rooftop bars. She strutted around campus, draped in designer labels, looking at me with pure pity every time I dragged myself into the dorm at 3 a.m., smelling like stale coffee and whiteboard markers. "You look awful, Emma," she purred one afternoon, applying a coat of Chanel lip gloss. "You really should have fought me for that box. Tristan is taking me to the Hamptons this weekend to meet his parents. His mother is already talking about a custom Vera Wang gown. Congratulations, I said, barely looking up from my spreadsheet. Just make sure you read the prenup. She scoffed, flipping her hair. Please, Tristan loves me. We aren't doing a prenup. He said, what's his is mine. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop from laughing out loud. What's his is mine. In the first timeline, I didn't sign a prenup either. I thought it was romantic. I didn't realize that by not signing one, I became legally tethered to the Hastings family's colossal, hidden liabilities. Tristan's father had leveraged their entire real estate portfolio on a series of disastrous commercial developments in Dubai. The family was hemorrhaging cash, surviving entirely on credit, shell companies, and the illusion of wealth. Daphne thought she was marrying into a gold mine. She was actually strapping herself to a sinking anvil. Meanwhile, my timeline was accelerating. Arthur and I had built a working prototype of our software, Aethera Tech, but we needed capital. Daphne's first big break in the past life had been securing a $1 million seed round from Richard Montgomery, a notoriously cutthroat venture capitalist. I knew exactly where Montgomery would be on a rainy Tuesday in October, nursing a scotch at the bar of the Oak Room in the city. I didn't dress up. I wore a sharp blazer, carried a cheap tablet, and sat next to him. I didn't pitch him like a desperate student. I spoke to him like an equal. I recited the exact market pain points Daphne had used in her original pitch, but I delivered them with the terrifying, unyielding calm of someone who had already lived through the consequences of failure. You're asking for $1.5 million on a pre-revenue prototype, Montgomery rumbled, swirling his drink. You're either a genius or completely delusional. I'm offering you 15% of a company that will dictate the global standard for data compression in 36 months, I replied, sliding the tablet across the polished wood. Look at the back-end benchmarks. I'm not asking for your money, mister. Montgomery, I'm offering you a seat on the rocket ship. He stared at the numbers. He stared at me. 3 days later, Aethera Tech had its first $1.5 million in the bank. I was officially in the game, and as I signed the term sheet, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a picture from Daphne. She was flashing a massive 5-carat diamond ring. The caption read, "He proposed, future Mrs. Hastings. Number blessed, number fate." I smiled, locking my phone. Enjoy the view from the top of the house of cards, Daphne. The wind is starting to blow. By the time Daphne and Tristan's wedding rolled around in the summer of 2019, the divide between our two realities had become an unbridgeable chasm. The wedding was the social event of the season, splashed across the pages of every high society magazine. Daphne walked down the aisle of a historic cathedral in a custom silk gown that cost more than my entire college tuition. She wore a tiara of authentic, vintage diamonds, and her smile was blinding. To the world, she had won the ultimate prize. She was the undisputed female lead, rescued from the mundane struggles of the middle class and elevated to a throne of generational wealth. I sat in the back pew, wearing a modest navy suit, checking my phone under the hymn book. Arthur was texting me server load updates. While Daphne spent her honeymoon on a private island in the Maldives, I moved into a windowless office in a repurposed industrial park. Aethera Tech was growing, but to secure our next round of funding, a staggering Series B that would push us into unicorn territory, we needed to prove our algorithm could revolutionize a physical, heavily entrenched industry. We needed a sector drowning in archaic data practices. The answer was global logistics. I spent my nights staring at blinding monitors, running endless, complex Excel formulas for technical data management until my eyes blurred. We weren't just compressing cloud data anymore. We were overhauling bloated, outdated warehouse management systems. My absolute obsession over the last 6 months had been constructing a flawless, automated freight transport organization plan. I was mapping out commercial trucking routes, meticulously optimizing cargo paths from the bustling coastal ports of Boston all the way down to the distribution hubs in Miami. I learned the agonizing intricacies of container release procedures, dock scheduling, and freight routing. It was grueling, unglamorous, ulcer-inducing work. My back constantly ached, my diet consisted entirely of takeout, and my social life was non-existent. But every time I cracked a new routing inefficiency, saving our beta test clients millions in fuel and time, the valuation of Ethereum skyrocketed. Then came the winter of 2021. I was invited to the annual Montgomery Charity Gala, a hyper-exclusive event hosted by my lead investor, Richard Montgomery. I arrived not as a +1, but as a platinum sponsor. I wore a sharp, tailored emerald gown, my posture straight, radiating the quiet, unshakable confidence of a woman who had built her own fortress. Daphne was there too. When I spotted her across the ballroom, the breath caught in my throat. The magazine still portrayed her as flawless, but seeing her in person, the illusion shattered. She was shockingly thin. Her eyes, once bright with ambition, were hollow and darted nervously around the room. She was dripping in emeralds, but they looked heavy, like beautiful green shackles dragging her down. Beside her stood Tristan. He was holding a scotch glass entirely too tightly, his face flushed, arguing in hushed, aggressive tones with a banking executive. I watched as Tristan suddenly turned to Daphne, his face contorted in a vicious sneer. He grabbed her upper arm hard enough to leave a mark and hissed something in her ear. Daphne flinched, shrinking into herself, nodding rapidly with a terrified plastic smile plastered on her face. My stomach churned. The female lead destiny wasn't a romance. It was a hostage situation. Later that evening, I found her hiding in one of the opulent, marble-tiled restrooms, desperately applying concealer over a faint, yellowish bruise on her jawline. "Rough night?" I asked softly, stepping into the warm light of the vanity mirrors. Daphne whipped around, her eyes wide like a cornered animal. When she saw it was me, a complex wave of emotions washed over her face, relief, shame, and a sudden, defensive hostility. She looked at my gown, at the confidence in my stance, and her jaw tightened. "Emma," she said, her voice brittle, "I didn't expect to see you here. I heard you were playing startup." "We just closed our Series B at a $1.2 billion valuation," I replied evenly. "I'm not playing, Daph." Her hand trembled slightly as she snapped her compact shut. "Money isn't everything. I have a husband who takes care of me. I have a title. I have a life you could only dream of." "Do you?" I stepped closer, dropping the pleasantries. "Tristan's family is drowning, Daphne. You don't have to pretend with me. I know about the commercial real estate defaults. I know about the frozen offshore accounts." Her face went completely ashen. "How? How could you possibly know that?" "Because his creditors are my investors," I said simply. "Richard Montgomery is circling the Hastings portfolio like a vulture. They are going to liquidate everything, Daphne. And because you didn't sign a prenup, you are legally tied to his personal liabilities." Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over her meticulously applied lashes. The facade finally broke. "He lied to me," she choked out, gripping the edge of the marble sink until her knuckles turned white. "The moment we got married, he changed. He controls my phone, my credit cards, who I talk to. When the bank started calling, he blamed me. He said I was bad luck. He hurts me, Emma, and I can't leave. I have no money of my own. I have nowhere to go." She looked at me, a desperate, agonizing plea in her eyes. "You have to help me, please. You have all this money now. Just loan me enough to hire a lawyer and disappear." We were best friends. I looked at the woman who had happily chosen a life of luxury while intentionally leaving me a box she believed was filled with ruin and hardship. I remembered the sneer on her face in our past life when she refused to help me escape this exact same monster. "You chose the easy road, Emma. I don't waste capital bailing out bad investments." "I'm sorry, Daphne," I said, my voice perfectly calm, perfectly cold. "But I don't waste capital bailing out bad investments." I turned and walked out of the restroom, leaving her sobbing into the marble. The end game had officially begun. 6 months later, the Hastings real estate dynasty collapsed in a spectacular, highly publicized implosion. The news networks ran relentless coverage of federal agents raiding their corporate headquarters. Tristan was indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud and embezzlement. The family's yachts were seized, the Hamptons estate was foreclosed upon, and the luxury cars were towed away in the middle of the night. To satisfy the massive mountain of debt and avoid federal prison for the rest of his natural life, Tristan's father was forced into a fire sale of their only remaining legitimate asset, Hastings Logistics, a massive, albeit severely mismanaged, network of warehouses and commercial freight trucks. It just so happened that Ethera Tech was looking to acquire a physical logistics infrastructure to vertically integrate our new warehouse management system and proprietary freight routing software. I didn't send an emissary. I didn't send a proxy. I walked into the Hastings boardroom myself. The room smelled of stale sweat and desperation. Tristan looked 10 years older, his designer suit hanging loosely on his thinning frame. His father looked utterly defeated. And sitting in the corner, staring blankly at the mahogany table, was Daphne. She was there to sign away her spousal rights to the subsidiary. When I walked through the double doors, flanked by Arthur and a team of high-powered corporate attorneys, Tristan's head snapped up. "What is this?" Tristan demanded, his voice cracking. "Where is Montgomery?" He said his buyer was coming. "Mr. Montgomery is my minority partner," I said, taking the seat directly across from Tristan. I placed a thick, leather-bound portfolio on the table. "I am the buyer, Tristan. And I'm offering you exactly 30 cents on the dollar for your entire logistics division." Tristan's face turned a mottled, furious red. 30 cents? That's robbery! That barely covers the outstanding employee pensions. We need at least 70 to keep the feds off our backs. "You have no leverage to negotiate," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "Your warehouse management is a disaster. Your freight transport routes are a logistical nightmare. Your fleet is aging. I'm not buying your company for its current value. I'm buying it for the scrap metal and the real estate. 30 cents. Take it, or I walk. And you can explain to the judge why you can't make restitution." Tristan opened his mouth to scream at me, but his father placed a heavy, defeated hand on his shoulder. "Sign it, Tristan," the old man rasped. "It's over." As Tristan furiously scrawled his name across the acquisition papers, breaking his own pen in the process, Daphne finally looked up. She stared at me, her eyes wide, tracing the sharp lines of my tailored suit, the confident set of my shoulders, the sheer, undeniable power I commanded in a room full of broken men. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You took the male lead box." I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. "I did." But how?" Daphne's voice rose, tinged with a hysterical edge. "That box was supposed to be a curse. It was supposed to be endless suffering, stress, starting from the dirt. You were a literature major. You were supposed to fail." "I did start from the dirt, Daphne," I said quietly, the boardroom falling deathly silent as the men watched our bizarre exchange. "I worked 100-hour weeks. I ate instant noodles. I spent years grinding through technical data, learning freight routing, building systems from scratch. I suffered. I stressed, but I built a foundation." I stood up, buttoning my blazer. "The boxes didn't give us a finished product, Daphne. They gave us a trajectory," I explained, looking down at her. "Your female lead box gave you the irresistible charm to catch a wealthy heir. But it didn't guarantee he was a good man, or that his wealth was real. You relied entirely on someone else to build your castle, and you never bothered to check if the pillars were made of sand." Daphne's breath hitched, her hands trembling violently in her lap. "My box didn't hand me $1 billion tech empire," I continued. "It handed me a USB drive and an opportunity. I had to become the male lead myself. I had to become the king." I slid a small white envelope across the mahogany table toward her. "Inside is a cashier's check for $50,000 and the business card of the best divorce attorney in the state," I told her, my voice softening just a fraction. "Consider it a severance package for your role as my college roommate. Get out of this family before Tristan takes you down to federal prison with him." Daphne stared at the envelope as if it were a bomb. The woman who had sneered at me, who had gleefully snatched the easy road, who had left me to die in a previous life, slowly reached out with trembling fingers and pulled the envelope to her chest. She lowered her head, her shoulders shaking with silent, heaving sobs. I didn't stay to offer comfort. I had a logistics empire to overhaul. I walked out of the boardroom, Arthur matching my stride as we headed toward the glass elevators. The city skyline stretched out before us, vast, glittering, and entirely mine. The rain had stopped, and the afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, reflecting off the towering skyscrapers I now held stakes in. I didn't need a fairy tale. I didn't need a prince to rescue me. I had rewritten the algorithm of my own destiny, and the future was looking incredibly profitable. Daphne thought the female lead box was a golden ticket, but she traded her independence for a gilded cage that ultimately crashed to the ground. She learned the hard way that relying on someone else's empire leaves you powerless when it falls. Meanwhile, I built my fortune from the ground up, proving that real power isn't handed to you, it's forged. If you loved this story of karma, strategy, and ultimate revenge, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe, and share this video. Stay tuned for more epic rebirth dramas.